What's up, guys? It's Joey, and we're back for week 7. I'm joined again by Ian and Luke. Finally, we got all three of us back. I feel like it's been one of you guys each week, but we finally have all three of us back. I want to say in the studio, but we do not have a studio. We all have our own apartments, I believe. But that's okay because we're killing it. Week 7 already. I think after this week, it's halfway through the fantasy regular season. Kind of feels like it's going by too fast. Crazy. So before we get into TNF Recap, just want to remind you guys, as always, Underdog, get on Underdog, use code ANALYST, get a match your first deposit up to $100. Now that that's out of the way. Last night, I'll jump into it. I've been saying for a little while, guys, to buy Javonte Williams with, what's his name? Tyler Batty. Once he got hurt, it became Javonte Williams' backfield. He's had 60+% of the snaps over the last 3 weeks. It finally came into fruition last night against the Saints, who have been terrible against running backs. And he's kind of looked like old Javonte a little bit. And that's something that I've been really happy to see. But Luke, what other takeaways do you have from this Broncos offense? I mean, Troy Franklin last night, was it 5 for 50 on the night? Something like that?
I wouldn't really have too much to take away. The Saints look like they're kind of down and out. Obviously, Javonte, I advised to start him on this show last week. It didn't quite work out. He had a decent week, but this week was the week, and I don't know if I should attribute it to the Broncos offense as much as I should attribute it to the Saints just collapsing. 5 losses in a row now, I think. Spencer Rattler actually looked decent last week, and he was awful this week. Just nothing really going right for them. The Broncos, this is probably going to be the best offensive output you get from them all year. So it's hard to see if Troy Franklin's going 5 catches, 50 yards in this game. It's hard to see him improving that much for the rest of the year when the Broncos play real competition.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think at the same time as well, like, Bo Nix is a rookie, and this offensive line is great. So as he keeps getting more comfortable, like we've seen with Caleb Williams, and I mean, Caleb Williams has had some cakewalk matchups, but for the most part, I mean, Bo Nix is starting to get his groove. He has like over 70 yards rushing last night. He was able to tuck it and run, which is a lot of what we saw in college, a lot of what we were hoping was going to translate to the NFL, especially for fantasy football purposes. So seeing that was great. All right. You want to add anything, Ian?
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, 2 things. One, the Troy Franklin thing is very good for like Dynasty. If you bought into him in Dynasty, I think you feel a little bit more comfortable that he's done a little bit. I was like a Javon Baker investor in Dynasty, and I'm just waiting for like a game where he just like shows a pulse, just to remind me that I drafted a player,
or just be active. I would take that.
Yeah. The main thing I take away from this is that like every 5 or so years, we see like the new college fans become NFL fans, and they start like questioning the draft process because this guy looked good in college and this guy looked good here. Like I have a friend that doesn't believe Anthony Richardson is anything because, he didn't win a couple of games at Florida. Spencer Rattler sucks. There's a reason he went in the 5th round. There are scouts that do this for a living. He sucks. He's not going to be anything. That's it. That's all I wanted to add. He's not good.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on the fact that Courtland Sutton, no catches in this game, completely invisible for the entire game. And on top of that, too, Jake Haener came in at the end of the game and put together a touchdown drive. I mean, again, the last moments of the entire game. I don't know if anybody's putting 100% on that field, but Jake Haener came in, immediately struck up a TD drive. I needed Bub Means to get one more catch from our parlay to hit, and he didn't do it. So very sad about that after 8 targets or whatever, 8 catches the week before. I digress. So that's how that went. Now we have a fun little segment coming up. This was Ian's idea. Let's see how it goes. Ian, I want you to start off. We're going to each name off obscure players at each position. So I guess we'll start at quarterback.
Yeah, I've been seeing this around TikTok for basketball a lot. So I wanted to try our hand football wise. So quarterback wise, I want to start off with a guy that I remember for having one good week with the Raiders in like 2008 or something like that. And I thought he was going to be like God, and then he like never started another game. Give me Bruce Gradkowski.
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, that he's one of those guys. Like, oh, that's a guy that sounds like a guy. Yeah.
Like Rob Gronkowski, Sebastian Janikowski had a baby.
Yeah. Had a baby, and he was a backup quarterback.
Okay, Luke, who you got?
I actually also went to the Raiders, more early 2010s, or I guess mid 2010s. Derek Carr's MVP season. Everyone remembers him going down, and then it's kind of a tandem. But you've got Matt McGloin and Connor Cook picking it up for him, and then Connor Cook starting a playoff game. That was a great time.
Michigan State legend.
The first quarterback in NFL history to make his first NFL start in a playoff game, which I found out when I was trying to think of players.
Nice.
Wow. Very good poll. My quarterback, not as big of a poll, not really as much NFL history significance, and it's kind of a homer pick because I'm a Patriots fan. Danny Etling. So I remember seeing him go crazy in preseason. I think he had like a 80-yard rushing touchdown or something like that. And I remember, I think he was technically third string or backup to the Patriots. And on Madden, when I was using the Patriots, I would bench Brady and put Etling in because Etling could run. And obviously in Madden, if you had someone fast enough, especially a quarterback, it made things easier. So when I wanted to do a running play in Madden, I would like bench Brady, put in Danny Etling, and just kind of get the extra yard. But yeah, okay, that's my quarterback poll. Ian, coming back to you for a running back poll.
All right, this guy, more of a returner and also kind of a meme. Give me LaRod Stevens Howling, known for his time as a returner for the Cardinals. He had like a couple of seasons where he started and his return numbers dropped off. Then he went to the Steelers and just like died, I guess. Like he had like 2 carries or something and then never did anything again. But circulating my timeline a few years ago was a picture of him saying, "She LaRod on my Stevens till I'm howling," and I'll never forget that. So thanks, LaRod.
Okay, Luke, who's your running back poll?
Yeah, so I tried to take a fantasy relevant guy, and this guy is relevant to me because my first ever year playing fantasy, I was probably like 12 years old, and I picked him because everyone on the internet was telling me Matt Forte was going to get hurt. So I picked Jeremy Langford, who was his backup in Chicago, and I don't think Matt Forte got hurt, but Lang actually did put up a top 25 in that year in fantasy anyway. So the pundits didn't do me wrong that year.
I like that. I remember having Jeremy Langford.
Yeah,
that was a good time. Running back, I got 2, just because another one came up to me. Tim Hightower, but like kind of this guy where like in fantasy, it was like, all right, wherever he went, if he got a chance to actually get on the field, he was gonna rip it each and every time. And the other one is Bo Scarborough, Alabama running back. Drafted in the 7th round, 6'2", 235. Thought this dude was going to be a beast of the NFL, but
I've never seen so many edits of a player that never did a damn thing in his career.
He's really the Jamarcus Russell of the running back position.
I guess, but I guess 7th round is like 1st round for running back.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Ian, handing it off to you for wide receiver.
All right, this one is a homer pick for me. I don't know because he did have a Pro Bowl season, but I'm talking Steve Smith, and not Steve Smith Sr., the Carolina Steve Smith. I'm talking Steve Smith from USC, number 12 for the Giants, who had like nothing going on in his career. And then the one year we won the Super Bowl, he had like 1,200 yards and a Pro Bowl season on like almost 160 targets. And then like never even half replicated that for the rest of his career. So shout out Steve Smith.
the real Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Luke, what do you got?
Yeah, I got another more recent one here. Tajay Sharp. He was a wide receiver on the Titans who was unfortunately on my first ever dynasty team the first year that started up. That was not very fun. I think, and that's even as recent as the COVID era player. I think he was on the Falcons as recently as a few years ago. I remember he was still floating the fantasy airwaves as recently as 2020, but never for himself. Didn't do anything for my dynasty team. Shame.
If you ever want a good pull for one of these things, scroll down on your sleeper like free agent list on a dynasty league. Some great names in there.
That's a good point. That's a good way to get some of these names. Mine for this one, I don't feel like is as obscure because I feel like it's more of a well-known name, but the highest drafted player in Mount Union history, Cecil Shorts III.
I vaguely
remember. So he was drafted the Jaguars in the 4th round. He had like one semi-productive year when it was like 700 or so yards, but he had so many injuries in his career. He was a backup quarterback in college, and then once Pierre Garçon left Mount Union, he transitioned to wide receiver. He had like 23 touchdowns in his first year as a receiver in college. He's super fast, smaller guy, but too many injuries, ACL, groin. He got put on injured reserve for a concussion at one point in his career. Like it went downhill quick, but he was one of those short, like type of guys that could work out of the slot and put up some big numbers. So shout out Cecil Shorts III. Ian, tight end. What you got? Last one.
All right, this one's kind of old school. And by old school, I mean like I was a kid. So if you're older listening to this, don't sue me. But I remember from his name, Bubba Franks, tight end from Green Bay. I think he was a starter like for forever. I just always remember him being like part of the repertoire of Brett Favre, who when I was a kid, I loved Brett Favre. That has not aged well. That is not a great opinion. But back in the day, man, Bubba Franks on Madden, he could get it.
He could get it? Whoa, what do you mean by that, Ian?
That's for me to know. You'd find out.
All right, Luke, let's move on before we get kicked off YouTube.
Tight ends, I went with a homer pick myself. Ian, how are we feeling about Will Tye? Giants legend.
Yes.
I think he might have been fantasy relevant for a little bit.
Number 45 at tight end.
What a fucking weird number.
And
I thought he was a fullback for like the first year he was on the team.
Okay. Mine, another homer pick. As Patriots did. Scott Chandler. He had some great moments as a backup tight end behind Gronk. And as we know, Gronk got hurt from time to time. I think he was originally from the Bills. And as Bill Belichick does, we played against the Bills, and Scott Chandler, I think, had like 2 touchdowns. Similar to Chris Hogan. How like Chris Hogan was on the Bills, and Chris Hogan had a huge game against the Patriots. That would have been a good pull too. But how he had a big game against the Patriots, and then Bill next season was like, "You're mine now." He kind of did the same thing with Scott Chandler, because Scott Chandler was with the Bills, and then he came to the Patriots. He had this signature thing. I think when he scored a touchdown, he would like dig into the dirt and like throw it behind him. But he was a very good backup tight end. I think he was post Aaron Hernandez era. Like right after that, he was like the quote unquote like duo for tight end for the Patriots.
Ironic that he was digging after Aaron Hernandez. It's
Luke. Not Luke, Ian. Stop it, Ian.
Was Chris Hogan that lacrosse player?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I
remember him.
I think he retired and then played professional lacrosse. I mean, I don't know how high you can go with that, or he's very involved in that now. I'm not sure, but yes, he is the lacrosse player that you are thinking.
Okay, cool. I remember him.
All right, that was cool. I like that. I think we'll have to come up with a little game or something every week, which we kind of have been already, but I think that was a good add-on there. So, all right, we have players. Believe it or not, guys, we have players for this week. And Ian, I'm going to start with you. These are players we're highlighting because we like their matchup. We don't like their matchup. We like them. We don't like them. Whatever really you want. It can be players who were like sneaky stars, players who were desperate stars, players who were sits. Could be obvious guys who just have like really good matchups. It could be whatever you want. But Ian, the floor is yours. Who is your first player?
Cool. I generally like to go on the positive side of these things. So my start of the week is Hunter Henry. Jacksonville's defense is awful, like specifically pass defense. They allow the most passing yards in the league. And they also allow the most receiving touchdowns to tight ends, which is something we saw with Cole Kmet last week. Coupled with the fact that Drake May looked fantastic in his first start. Fantastic for like, there were some bad moments, but I did think he looked really good, threw more touchdowns in that game than Jakobi Brissett had all year. And one of those went to Hunter Henry. And we've seen like in the past couple of years when the Patriots offense has been struggling on their good games, they find Hunter Henry in the end zone. That's something they want to exploit. He's a good red zone target. If he has a competent quarterback, I think he's a high upside touchdown play, and I think you should lock him into your lineups.
Something interesting about that too is as a Patriots fan, I remember when Hunter Henry got signed to the Patriots, and I was so excited. I was like, yes, this is the best thing we've had since Gronk. We really excited to see Hunter Henry be like the guy for the Patriots. And then literally within 24 hours, they signed Jonnu Smith.
Who did that help?
And then once Jonnu Smith left, I was like, oh, thank God. Now Hunter Henry has this tight end room all to himself. And then Mike Gesicki came along. And now Mike Gesicki is gone. Jonnu Smith is gone. They have Austin Hooper, who I still don't like that he's getting some catches, but it is much more of Hunter Henry's full role. I don't know if this is, I felt like part of it was like Bill Belichick kind of hanging on to that Gronk and Hernandez type era where they just really had such a strong duo at tight end. And like he just kept, it felt like Belichick was just kind of trying to replicate that through the rest of his entire career of like, okay, I'm going to relive the glory days, pair this tight end with this guy, and it's going to be great no matter what. So didn't work out.
That's frustrating.
Very frustrating. But Luke, what you got? First player.
I've got David Njoku, so maybe we have a little bit of a tight end battle here.
I do not have a tight end. Sorry to say. Oh, I actually do. You know what? I'll do my tight end next.
All right.
Continue, Luke.
Perfect. But yeah, I have to start this off by just pointing out how ridiculous this is that Deshaun Watson is still playing. He's awful. He's terrible. He's by far the worst.
Okay. Thank God. I mean, Ian's had some edgy comments already so far. I did not know where you were going with that, Luke.
No,
I thought you were going to be like, he's a fucking...
I'm the football show, okay?
Okay. Luke's very serious.
He's an awful football player, all right? Regardless of anything else that's going on.
I
cannot believe that he's still playing. It's a fireable offense that Kevin Stefanski still has him in there, but it must be coming from above because they're not firing him for it. So I feel like he's in a terrible spot. Stefanski, these players I feel terrible for. They're not competitive. All that being said, Amari Cooper's gone. Top 5 in targets in the league with 50. Those got to go somewhere. David Njoku already out-targeted him last week. It didn't translate into box score success. But I'm hoping, Kevin Stefanski, 2-time coach of the year, just draw something easy up, man. Just get the ball in Njoku's hands, let him run with it. That's what they did at the end of last year, and it worked. He was a pretty successful fantasy tight end. That's what I'm hoping for now with all these targets open. So I'm running David Njoku into my lineups.
And I think a lot of what the Browns are going to, or at least they should do, is move to more 12 personnel. Have 2 tight ends in the field and just kind of base your offense off that running game. Because without Amari Cooper, they really don't have much other threats at wide receiver. You have Jerry Jeudy, you have maybe Elijah Moore, but like at the same time, appointment was scheduled. That's weird. But all being said, David Njoku should be a top 5, top 6 tight end going forward if that offense is smart. So my tight end, this almost feels like an obscure name. I like what we were doing before. It's Jatavion Sanders for the Panthers. It's hard to really buy into any Panthers offensive player at this point, other than Deontay Johnson and maybe Chuba Hubbard. But Jatavion Sanders coming off a 19.4% target share, which was ninth amongst ninth amongst tight ends last week. His snaps have ramped up the last 2 weeks, and he's played 75% and 73% of the offensive snaps. So Jatavion Sanders is becoming a consistent part of this offense. The Commanders and Panthers game, which is this week, has the highest point total of the week at 51.5 points. And the Commanders are 7.5 point favorites, meaning that the Panthers are going to have to throw the ball in this game. Sanders has a 91.2 and 85.3 route participation rate over the last 2 weeks, which for a tight end, if you're over an 80% route participation rate, that is usually a very, very good thing. It just means you're not just being used as a blocker. You are a consistent part of this offense. So it was said prior to the season that Jatavion Sanders would be a consistent part of this offense. He would be a starter. He was one of my favorite tight ends into this class, obviously outside of Brock Bowers. But yeah, Jatavion Sanders, things are looking up. I would call him a desperate start this week. And given how bad the tight end landscape is, there might be some teams that actually need to start him this week. Did you want to add anything to that, Ian, or are you just looking at me?
I'm just looking at you, man.
Ooh.
You look great. You sounded awesome there.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. I thought you wanted to respond. I was like, oh, please, the floor.
No, I was just unmuting because I was coughing off screen.
Okay, cool. Dude, this is going. I love this. This is going great. Ian, your next player, please.
All right, so this one you were going to start him anyway because you have to, but we've been waiting for the Bijan Robinson game. I've kind of been, not to pat myself on the back, but I've been pretty accurate with projecting like the breakout games for guys we've been waiting to break out. I think this is the week. Seattle's defense has been really, really bad. I sent out a tweet, I think on week 3 saying that like, oh, like the double slate Monday night game could be like 2 defensive showdowns. And then Seattle let up like 40 to Detroit. They've been completely awful since I sent out that tweet. So I don't know if it's related to me or not, but they can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. And specifically, they're allowing the 3rd most rushing yards to running backs and the 3rd most yards per carry to running backs. And Atlanta's been hot. If they take a lead, they're going to want to keep the ball on the ground. And I think it was clear from last week that they wanted to get Bijan a little bit more involved. They found the end zone for him. I just think this is the week where everything kind of meshes well and puts itself together.
I agree. And I think what's different from this week to last week is Seattle should keep it a close game. It feels like Tyler Algier for the Falcons is their closer. Like Bijan is the guy they're going to use when they want to stay in this game, but Tyler Algier is going to be the guy they use when they just want to run the clock out and get some garbage time. I think Tyler Algier had over 100 yards last week against the Panthers. So this week against Seattle, I agree. Seattle's been terrible against running backs. And then on top of that, they should keep it close enough to where Bijan continues to stay on the field. And that's really the biggest thing. So, Luke, your next player.
Yeah, you guys are too positive. I have to throw some sits in here if nobody else is going to do it. I've been pretty decent with the sit calls, I guess, so far. This week I'm going to Josh Downs, assuming Anthony Richardson plays, that is, because Anthony Richardson seems to kill this passing offense when he's playing, as unfortunate as that is, because I was a big Anthony Richardson fan, and I'm still hoping for the best. He had a great week 1, but since then he hasn't done anything. He hasn't shown us that he can throw the ball at all. They're not even trying to throw when he plays. He has less than 20 pass attempts, more games than not, and I feel like a decent amount of those go to the running backs and then to Pittman. Meanwhile, while Joe Flacco's in, Josh Downs is his favorite target, and he's been popping off. He's, I believe, the wide receiver 14 in average fantasy points per game because he did miss the first week. But with how deep the wide receiver position is and with Anthony Richardson looking like he's going to come back, I think there are other better options at wide receiver than Josh Downs for sure.
I agree to an extent. I mean, I think Anthony Richardson in that first week, he had a nice long touchdown to Alec Pierce. And I just think that the way they shaped this offense with Richardson on the field is more so geared towards highlighting the running game and then complementing it with like those deep shots. So I mean, that also doesn't bode well for Josh Downs, who's been more of like the check down guy for a guy like Joe Flacco. So we'll see. But I don't hate that take. I think with Richardson, there's an obvious downgrade. It's just about like, is he even startable or is he just completely not? Okay. My next player here, and this is going to come really stupid because it's such an obvious player. But I wanted to highlight the fact that their matchup this week is golden. So maybe if you're doing DFS or you're doing some prop bets to take the over on this player, and that player being Amon-Ra St. Brown. I have him ranked as my number 1 wide receiver this week. He's going against the Vikings. The Vikings are the worst defense in the league against opposing wide receivers. They're allowing the most fantasy points to that position. On top of that, the Vikings are favored in this game. I don't know how many games the Lions are going to go into this year being underdogs at this point. So the fact that they have a real chance to up the passing game in this matchup, they can't just like David Montgomery their way out of it, bodes well for his potential to just stay on the field and rack up those catches. Another point, too, is that the Vikings play the most double high coverage, 2 high coverage in the entire league. And, I mean, pretty straightforward, but for those who don't know, 2 high coverage typically leaves the middle of the field open as opposed to having a nickelback. Lose photograph. As opposed to having a nickelback, sorry. As opposed to having a nickel on the field, they play 2 safeties, which leaves the middle of the field open. And that's where Amon-Ra St. Brown thrives out of the slot. He thrives against 2 high coverage, and the Vikings play the most 2 high coverage in the entire league. So, yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown, for me, he's my wide receiver 1. I think he's going to have one of his typical huge games. So, big fan. All right, Ian, your next player.
All right, my last guy here. I guess this is a little more obscure, like more of a like if you're in need, you could start this guy. But give me Jakobi Meyers this week. The Rams were really bad in passing metrics in the beginning of the year. It's kind of slowed down a little bit, and I think that's been a little bit more matchup dependent. They've been scoring a little bit more on offense. The offense looked a little bit better. Teams are trying to keep the ball out of Stafford's hands. They're running the ball a little bit more. So a lot of like the passing yards per games numbers are still down. They're still letting up the big play though, which means they haven't gotten better. They're just getting thrown at less. And to me, they're still top 5 in receiving touchdowns allowed and just outside of the top 5 in both 20 plus and 40 plus yard plays allowed. Jakobi Meyers is now the number 1 in Las Vegas. He's always been a very good receiver. I think that if they're going to want to stay in this game, they're going to have to throw the ball because the Rams will score the football. So, yeah, fire me up some Jakobi Meyers. I think he's a very solid flex option this week.
I didn't realize I muted it. I was like, how do I get that? No, I like that. I like that. I think I have Jakobi Meyers starting in a couple of leagues this week. It's a good matchup, as you said. And I think from this point forward, the Raiders are going to need to pass. So as long as they're not going against the team that was loud, I apologize. As long as they're not going up against a team that can take away that primary coverage, they, like a Pat Surtain or something like that can take Jakobi Meyers out of the game, and then they'll just rely on Brock Bowers, then I think he's definitely startable. Luke, last player, who you got?
Yeah, I've got probably similar to you in that most people who roster this guy are going to be starting him, but I guess he wasn't a first-round pick at the beginning of the year. But this is more so matchup-based. Give me JK Dobbins to destroy all his projections against Arizona. Arizona's defense is terrible. Their run defense is especially terrible. And the Chargers' passing game has been very iffy. So they want to win the game in the trenches. They want to win the game by winning the turnover battle, and they want to win the game by running that ball. And with Gus Edwards out, J.K. Dobbins really took the lion's share of the workload. Kamani Vidal, my guy, got in there a little bit, but J.K. Dobbins was really the main focus. And against this Cardinals defense, I think he's going to run all over them. So get him in your fantasy lineups, get him in your daily fantasy lineups, in your parlays, whatever you need. JK Dobbins is the guy this week.
We're really just building a DFS lineup. I mean, at this point with Amon-Ra St. Brown and JK Dobbins. And I'll include my next guy, my final guy in that list as well, Tony Pollard. So Tony Pollard going against the Bills, not a matchup that you would specifically want to highlight, especially if you're like Tennessee Titans players, because that offense has just been terrible. But they are coming off of a bye. They had 2 weeks to prepare for this Bills team. On top of that, the Bills are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which alone is great. But when you couple that with the fact that they're allowing the most receptions per game and the most receiving yards per game to running backs, that becomes very important because Tyjae Spears is week to week with a hamstring injury. And when Spears went down last week, Tony Pollard had 90% of the team's snaps and opportunities in this backfield. So Tony Pollard is going to be on the field for third downs, for passing situations, and he could really benefit against a team that has been terrible against defending the running backs out of the backfield in terms of catching the ball. So Tony Pollard has a fantastic matchup this week. And that is going to do it. That is my last player for this week. Thank you guys for listening in. At the same time, Underdog. Check it out, guys. What are you doing? Analyst on Underdog. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. And we'll see you guys next week.